let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. I'm Patricia Shampton with Texas Exes, and thank you for joining us today for our virtual November Lunchtime Lecture. But before we get started, Texas Exes would like to thank our sponsor, UT's Extended Campus. Extended Campus offers graduate programs, professional certificates, and skill-building courses to support your career goals, no matter what your next step is. Texas Exes members can get a 10 to 25% discount on non-credit professional education courses as well. So you can learn more at extendedcampus.utexas.edu, and we'll drop that link in the chat. Don't worry about that. So today we are so excited to welcome Dr. Tamara Bell, Assistant Professor of Instruction in the Moody College of Communication. She's here to talk to us about the past, present, and future of podcasting. Dr. Bell has had varied and prolific career from working in journalism and public relations to the Texas Ledge, to founding Two Bells Media and coaching other entrepreneurs. She has also been recognized as one of our very own A Call Day Magazine's 2023 Texas 10 list of the most excellent UT professors. Please help me welcome Tamara Bell.
Hi, y'all. Thank you so much, and welcome to the lecture today. I'm so glad that y'all are able to join me on what I'm going to be talking about, which is the new IT medium, the past, present, and future of podcasting. And I'm really excited to talk to y'all today about podcasting, but here's the thing. So we're all on the same page. There's a lot to podcasting, right? And there's a lot going on with it right now. So it would be impossible for me to share everything about the industry in an hour or less. So for this talk, we'll be hitting the high points and other things that I feel may be of interest to you. So first, let's start with the definition. So podcasting means a program, as of music or talk, made available in digital format for automatic download over the internet. Okay, so now that we have a common definition, I think we can all agree that this election season was notable for many reasons. And one of those is candidates' use of podcast appearances to reach potential voters. Y'all may remember that both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris appeared on several podcasts. Here are just a few. And this did not go unnoticed by the mainstream or legacy media. They had all sorts of reasons for why this may be the case. For instance, more traditional interviews like 60 Minutes can feel especially rigid. Podcasts offer candidates an affable, jovial hang. Or maybe it's because traditional news audiences are shrinking, while podcasts and other alternative formats offer vastly more voters and potential voters to candidates. Of course, it could be that the podcast presidential campaign reflects the internet era scattering of audiences that has left legacy outlets less powerful than they once were. In the end, we don't know if voters were actually swayed by these interviews, but what we do know is that the interviews did get candidates into the ears of millions of potential voters, legitimizing podcasts as a powerful tool in this election. Now, okay, I gotta say that I came up with the topic for this lecture in the summer, before Kamala Harris was even a presidential candidate. And I wish I could say totally predicted it. Predicted that podcasting would be a big player in the election, but I didn't. But what I did know is that podcasting has reached its highest numbers ever, with over 90 million Americans being weekly podcast listeners. Okay, 53% of podcast listeners in the US over 18 have listened to a podcast in the last 30 days. 43% of podcast listeners aged 35 to 54 have listened to a podcast episode in the last 30 days, making them the fastest growing group of listeners. 43% of listeners are men and 48% are women. Over 60% have a college degree, and they have an average income of over $75,000. 28% tune in while they're driving or traveling, while 49% are at home when they're listening. 73% listen to podcasts on their smartphone or cell phone, which should come as no surprise, while 13% listen on desktop or laptops. I think my mom is actually in that 13%. But to understand how we got here, let's look at where podcasting began. So in the beginning, there was Steve Jobs and iPod. Okay, Steve Jobs introduced the iPod on October 23rd, 2001. It was released on November 10. At the time, Jobs said that Apple was venturing into the field of music with a device that could store up to 1,000 songs, a whopping 1,000 songs. Okay, so I'm just curious here. If you want to just drop this in the chat, how many of y'all bought the original iPod? I mean, how many of y'all were like the early adopters? You were like standing out in line on November 9th in front of your Apple store, couldn't wait to like beat down the door. Oh my God, we got to have an iPod. How many of y'all did that? Because I totally wish that I had been one of them. I was not. But hopefully there are some out there that y'all were like, oh my God, yes, I was there. I was in line, remember it well. I'm guessing that if you still have that original iPod, probably worth a few pennies today. So 2 years later, though, in 2003, software developer Dave Weiner, he created the RSS podcast feed. Now, if we're going to get technical here, that same year, Christopher Lydon actually launched the first podcast, Radio Open Source. But at that point, podcast or podcasting, they weren't even terms yet, right? It would be a year later in 2004 when this guy over here, his name is Ben Hammersley, he coined the term podcasting in this article over here for The Guardian. So he wrote that with the benefit of hindsight, it all seems quite obvious. MP3 players like Apple's iPod in many pockets, audio production software, cheap or free, and web blogging, remember web blogging? An established part of the internet. All the ingredients are there for a new boom in amateur radio. But what to call it? Audio blogging, podcasting, guerrilla media? I think we know which one won. So that same year, Adam Curry, former MTV video jockey, he collaborated with Dave Weiner. Remember him from a couple of ago?
I didn't even see you. How many people do we have at Texas Access, like staffed members?
Oh, wait, sorry.
The software,
When
remember
she stopped
Dave-
talking, I was like,
Do you know you did?
so he collaborated with Dave Weiner, who, remember, he was the software developer who created the RSS podcast feed in 2003. They collaborated to create a program, to code a program known as iPodder, which enabled them to download internet radio broadcasts to their iPods. So Curry went on to create the first true podcast, okay, the Daily Source Code, which was all about podcasting. It featured insights on Curry's everyday life and events in the podcasting space. He covered general news, and being a former MTV VJ, he played music from the PodSafe Music Network. So I'd like to now just kind of like dive into the rest of the podcast timeline. So we've got, again, in 2004, Adam Curry, Dave Weiner, they're credited with inventing the medium. 2005, okay, Apple iTunes 4.9 is released, fully supportive of podcasts. So this is Jobs building subscriptions into iTunes, right? Where podcasts then stopped being like a niche hobby for tech enthusiasts and started its own path toward the mainstream, okay? Then, again, that same year, George Bush becomes the first president. He delivers a weekly address in the form of a podcast. Again, the same year, podcast is declared word of the year by the new Oxford American Dictionary. The next year, okay, Steve Jobs demonstrates how to record a podcast using GarageBand. Now, in case it wasn't, in case people were still a little bit fuzzy at that time about what is this podcast thing, this was Jobs basically saying, hello, podcasts, they're a thing. Hop on board the train, people, before it leaves the station. So the next year, we've got Ricky Gervais. He sets a world record for the most downloaded podcast with an average of 250,000 downloads. Sounds kind of quaint now, doesn't it? And 2009 to 2011, Adam Carolla's podcast. And again, if y'all aren't sure about like Adam Carolla, I think I know that name. Who's that guy? He is a radio personality, comedian, actor, and podcaster. He hosts the Adam Carolla Show. And I know I'm totally dating myself, but the first time I ever saw Adam Carolla was on Loveline. It was that call-in show. I don't know if y'all remember. It was that call-in show on MTV in the 90s. He co-hosted it with Dr. Drew. Anyway, for 2 years it took him, and now granted this is early stage, but 2 years it took him to receive almost 60 million unique downloads of his podcast. But he was the first one to do that. So the following year, in 2013, we have Personal Audio. Now, Personal Audio is like a patent troll. And they saw the beauty of podcasting and decided to hop on and say, excuse me, we invented podcasting, and therefore everybody has to pay royalties to us. Okay, we're going to put a pin in that here in a second. So that was in 2013. Also that same year, Apple announced 1 billion podcast subscribers. That was amazing. So going back 2017, the court finally rules. I know courts move slowly. Finally ruled against Personal Audio, saying, excuse me, you are not the founder of podcasting. You didn't start that. And therefore, no royalties for you. And then in 2019, 165 million people had listened to a podcast by 2019, with 90 million Americans listening monthly. Okay, and so I'm highlighting that because if we go back into the wait time machine here, what I said before, quick reminder, podcasting today has reached the highest numbers ever, with 90 million Americans being weekly podcast listeners. Now, math, it's not my strong suit, okay? But 90 million weekly, more than 90 million monthly. And that growth happened in just the last 5 years. Okay, and that number, more than the 90 million, is in large part because of a little show called Serial. Okay, when Serial debuted in 2014, only like 30% of Americans had listened to a podcast. A spinoff of This American Life, Serial was created and produced by Sarah Koenig and Julie Snyder. The first season is about the case of Adnan Syed, who was serving a life sentence for the murder of his former girlfriend. It is considered to have changed podcasting and true crime, and is credited with catapulting podcasting into the golden age. Not only was it incredibly popular, and the first podcast to win a Peabody Award, which is considered the radio industry's equivalent of a Pulitzer Prize, but it ushered in a new way of telling audio stories with its conventional conversational style, high production values, and real-time unfolding of the storyline. As a matter of fact, according to fans, Koenig brought a transparent narrative when she admitted her shortcomings and confusion while investigating the case. And while the shows provided a clear story arc, right, they had a beginning, middle, and an end, it usually ended with a cliffhanger, right, keeping listeners on the edge of their seats, forcing them to wait a week for the next episode. So what does this, that golden era age of podcasting, what does that look like today? Okay, let's go back to the numbers. So as of early this year, there are over 3.3 million podcasts and over 191 million episodes worldwide. Spotify has over 250,000 video podcasts in its library, which is an increase from 100,000 just last year. YouTube is named as a source for podcast discovery by 52% of podcast consumers. The majority of podcasts, they're only between 20 and 40 minutes long, so they're not very long. And podcast ad revenue, it's expected to grow by 12% this year, surpassing $2 billion. Now, it's this last bullet that makes podcasting attractive to not just the listeners, but advertisers, potential podcast guests, and podcast creators. So it's not just for hobbyist amateur radio folks, right? Podcasting is a business, and it becomes more attractive when you think about the benefits. Because here's the thing about podcasts. Number one, they are on demand, right? Podcasting is the democratization of audio. Listeners have become less inclined to play a game of chance, tuning into the radio for any unknown mix of content. No offense to radio. They prefer to listen on demand to the exact same thing, to the exact thing that they want when they want it. Also, it's intimate. You know, podcast listeners are inviting hosts into their personal space. The hosts are so close to listeners, they're whispering in their ear, literally. That brings a certain intimacy between the host and their listeners that's not found in any other medium. I mean, think about it, video and the written word. They do not allow for that level of intimacy. For you to watch or read something, you have to hold it like at arm's length, okay? You cannot be like way up close to it because you can't see it. But with audio podcasts, I mean, the host's voice is in your ear. It's an always on marketing opportunity in a way that traditional ad campaigns just aren't. And when you're buying to air, you know, when you're buying to air at a specific time, right? This is on demand. It's always going to be available. So able to reach new audiences by taking risks and experimenting. So I was at South by this last March, and there were a lot of panels on podcasting, as you could probably imagine. A lot of podcasting panels, went to most of them. But even the panels that weren't about podcasting still touched on podcasting. Okay. There was one panel I went to where the panelists were talking about IP, intellectual property. And they were talking about how actually Hollywood is using podcasts as a proof of concept before they're greenlighting movies and series, right? They don't want to invest lots of money on a project that's not gonna have high returns, right? They want a return on that investment. So they're using podcasts as proof of concept. And then finally, they are able to create communities with passionate listeners. And it's this last one that brings us to this question. For each type of podcast, how likely would you be to listen? And I'm sharing this chart with you specifically for this last bar, okay? A podcast about a favorite brand or product, because this is where we're seeing, I believe, this is where we're seeing unusual activity. It's not surprising that businesses or brands buy advertising in different mediums, or that they want to be a guest on a podcast, right? Business owners, they love to be interviewed by their local newspaper, or, oh my God, they're on the Today Show. Who didn't want that? But now many brands are taking it a step further. And the good news is that you don't have to be a billionaire to do it. So if we look at this last bar right here, okay, 43% of respondents said they would be likely to listen to a podcast about a favorite brand or product. And brands are more than happy to give them what the people want, right? All these brands here, these are all the cover art for their podcasts. Now, to be clear, a branded podcast is a show produced by a brand. And just like any podcast, branded podcasts take many forms: personal interviews, deep dives into history, industry conversations, all of that. What it is not is a 30-minute infomercial, because ain't nobody want to listen to that. So what makes these successful? Okay, value. Number one, it's all about providing real practical value to listeners, whether it's a fun fact or it's an interesting anecdote that the listeners can share with their friends and family later on. Entertainment, again, no one's listening to a 30-minute ad. So no matter what your topic is, you need to present information or stories in a captivating and compelling way, right? Niche topics, right? Specific topics that create loyal listeners. And speaking of listeners, it is all about the listener. These brands are putting the focus on the listener, not making episodes all about themselves. Okay. And when they do talk about themselves, it's in a natural and relevant way. So I'd like to share with y'all an example of what this sounds like. Okay. Trader Joe's podcast, which is co-hosted by Tara Miller and Matt Sloan. They have 1 million listeners. 1 million listeners. Okay. So it uses its podcast to push out information about things that their customers want to know. Okay. So mini canvas tote bags. I don't know how many of y'all have actually been able to snag one of these, but if you have, snaps to you, because these are the hardest things to get. Apparently, they came out in March. I think they've come out again, and you still can't get them. These they're like hot potatoes. I mean, people are like just flying off the shelves. Okay, so you can see, still not available. All right, so Trader Joe's didn't realize they were going to be so popular, and they decided to use their podcast as a way to get information out about, what's going on with the mini tote bags. Okay, because for them, this was like a crisis situation, and they needed to let people know. Okay, I mean, who knew that this was going to be such a big deal? So here's their podcast. Okay, Trader Joe's Inside, and they have in case you missed it, what's up with Trader Joe's mini tote bags? Okay, and I want to just play for you just a minute or two from this podcast so we can get a sense of what this sounds like.
At Trader Joe's, our crew gets all kinds of questions about all kinds of products.
And please keep asking. We'll keep answering.
Okay, here are some new ones. Hey, how can I get a new mini tote bag? Okay, here's another. When can I get a new mini tote bag? And why can't I get a new mini tote bag?
Okay, now I'm noticing a theme here. Maybe we should just do an ICYMI mini episode about mini tote bags.
ICYMI, in case you missed it, what's going on with the new Trader Joe's mini tote bags?
Or maybe ICYMTMTB in case you missed the mini tote bags.
What is up with these tote bags? They're a thing that we didn't plan for them to be.
We've got to go back to 1977.
Really?
Yes, because that's when Trader Joe's first started offering reusable shopping bags, canvas shopping bags. And so it's not so much a new thing as it's just a really cute thing.
Yeah, I get the excitement. I'm still a little perplexed about how quickly that excitement went to kind of frenzy. And
Okay, so that I hope gives you a sense of what they were doing to get the message out that, oh my God, we've got a crisis here. Who knew this was going to be so popular? We've got to let people know about it. And, I just got to point out that was probably a better way to do it than just like a little note on their website, kind of explaining it, right? Because this sounds like, hey, friends, have you heard what's happening? Who knew they were going to be so popular, right? We want to give you the 411 on what's going on so you're in the know, right? And this goes also along with Trader Joe's vibe, right? It's friendly, playful, laid back, but also informative. Like, how can we help you? So again, this is kind of how their podcast rolls no matter what, right? So they're not using it as a 30-minute infomercial. They're not telling people to go buy the tote bags. This isn't a commercial to go buy the tote bag. They're actually explaining why they can't buy the tote bags, right? They're using the podcast to connect with their customers in a way that makes them more personable, more relatable. So all of that, okay, is leading to what? Okay, what does the future of podcasting look like? Now, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't even have a magic 8-ball, but there are lots of possibilities. So AI and machine learning. AI powered tools will certainly, just like AI is coming on strong in almost every industry, AI powered tools, they're going to enhance everything from content creation to distribution. For instance, we can probably expect AI to automate editing, sound mixing, and even generate real-time transcripts, making podcasts more accessible to a broader audience. They also, as we've been talking about just now, the cornerstone of brand marketing, right? Companies will increasingly invest in branded podcasts, right? Not just as a means of advertising. They're not just buying ads on other people's podcasts, right? But they're going to start creating their own podcasts as a way to establish thought leadership, connect with consumers, build brand loyalty. Audio dramas and interactive content. So audio dramas are starting to kind of take off again, right? And it's being, I guess, prognosticated that it will gain popularity, offering listeners even more immersive narratives that transport them to different worlds. And then with interactive podcasting, listeners can influence the direction of the story, maybe through the choices that they make, creating a more engaging and participatory experience. And then there's globalization of podcasting. As internet access improves and podcast platforms become more user-friendly in different languages, we'll probably see a rise in podcasts from diverse cultural backgrounds, offering a wide range of perspectives and stories. And all of that could and probably will happen. And that's great. I mean, I'm looking forward to that. But I gotta say, for me, I believe the power of podcasting lies in its ability to create community. And I think that will only accelerate in the future. So going back to the idea of niche content. So as the podcast market becomes more saturated. And I know I said that there were like 3.3 million podcasts around that available today. But just for perspective here, there are over 114 million active YouTube channels. So 114 million YouTube channels, 3.3 million podcasts. A little bit of a difference, right? So podcast clearly still has room to grow. It is not saturated yet. But as it becomes more saturated, okay, creators will need to carve out these specific niches, right, to attract and retain loyal audiences. According to a recent Forbes article, we can expect to see a surge in hyper-targeted podcasts focusing on highly specialized topics, like whether it's deep dives into like those obscure hobbies. Okay, maybe, you know, people have like these little hobbies that they want to be able to share with others. Or maybe it's micro histories or subgenres of subgenres, right? In health, wellness, business. Okay, these niche podcasts will cater to audiences who crave content that resonates deeply with their interests, while allowing creators to build dedicated communities around their shows. Now, in another Forbes article, Forbes is big on podcasting now, people. I mean, they've been writing all about it. Anyway, another Forbes article points out that as podcast communities are growing, okay, there's a natural evolution from digital to physical connections. So podcast meetups and live shows are becoming integral to growth strategies for many popular shows. But I'm going to say it's not just popular shows. I think that as we move into, you know, the next year and the next year, I think that no matter the size of the audience, whether you have 50 listeners or you have 50,000, I think that real life, moving into real life, having those real life experiences, those real life meetups, right? I think that that is going to be totally where it's at. Now, these in real life events, they serve multiple purposes too, right? They strengthen listener loyalty. Listeners are actually able to come and meet the people that they've been like letting into their ears, right? For how many years or how many months, okay? They're able to actually meet with them. They also will provide new content opportunities, okay? Because a lot of these podcasts, they have these, in real life experiences, these in real life meetups, and they're recording episodes. So then the episode will air and it'll say something like, hey, we're live from Dallas today. And, and then they'll have like some audience interaction while they're recording the podcast. And then it also creates a valuable networking spaces for the people who actually attend the events. I mean, I think if nothing else, COVID taught us that as human beings, we crave human connection. We crave being around other human beings, right? We want genuine relationships. We want organic conversations. And that's what a lot of these events are going to deliver, okay? When podcasts are moving more into real life. Because in the end, podcasting is about listening to each other. That's it. It's about listening to each other. And as Fraser Crane used to say, I'm listening. And so with that, I would love to answer any questions that you have.
We do have a few coming in. Great overview of podcasts. You've made me giggle this whole time. So appreciate all the information. So, first off, what are you listening to? What podcast are you listening to today?
Oh my gosh. Okay. So I tend to split my categories. I don't listen to one particular category. I'm definitely a true crime. Oh my God, love true crime. So I listen to a lot of Dateline. Actually, I listen to a lot of Dateline. Keith Morrison is my favorite, by the way. So I listen to Dateline, but I also really like, entertainment, comedy. So I also listen to Smartless, which has, Jason Bateman, Sean Hayes, Will Arnett.
Yes.
And love that podcast too. So those are the ones that I listen to mostly on a regular basis. I also have I'm on a gazillion email lists. And most of them are like, business and marketing and that type of thing, just because of the space that I teach in. And so they'll like send out an email that says, hey, I've got a new episode of my podcast today and it's about this topic. And I'm like, oh, well, that's an interesting topic. I think I want to listen to that. So I do a lot of one-off listenings too, just based on what lands in my inbox. But those are like my favorites.
I love Smartless too. It's one of my faves. So we've got I just wanted to say this out loud. So this lecture is being recorded. It will be available on YouTube. So, you'll either get some information from Texas X's on that, but you can always just go to YouTube, type in Texas X's, and you'll see our channel and you can find this there. So just wanted to let everybody know that. Also, there was a question I thought was kind of cool. What, if you know this, do you have any AI tools that are your favorite, or any AI generated podcasts that you may know about that you want to share?
Okay, so I don't really know of any AI generated podcasts. I will tell you about an AI tool. Okay, and I'm not an affiliate for these people, so it's not like I get anything if you like actually use this. But so if you're interested in like maybe creating your own, okay, and you want to know just like how that would work or something, because I co-host a podcast with my son, and so we use this AI. It's called Descript, where you can go in and you can upload or download your MP3, okay, that you record it. Then you this is how we work anyway. We record it over Zoom, we put it into Descript, and it will just like Otter.ai and some other tools and stuff, you put it in audio and it transcribes it for you. Well, the beauty of this one is that it transcribes it for you. But then when you go to edit it, it's like you're editing. If we go in and just edit a word, let's say that we messed up and we like repeated ourselves, which we have a tendency to do that. So we go in and maybe we'll like edit from the transcript, like, 2 words. It edits it from the audio. So like we don't have to go in and like there's no slicing and dicing the waves. It edits it from the audio. And so we're like, what? And so that's why we use that. But there is a catch to this though, as with all AI. I mean, at this point, AI is great, but it's not perfect. And so what'll happen is that we'll export the transcript, because then I go in and I'll edit the transcript, because then we obviously put the transcript on our website because that's best practices and you want to always have the transcript available for people. And but I have to go in and I have to spend like at least an hour editing the transcript from what we got from the AI generation. Because here's the thing, I'll give you an example. So we do a podcast, it's called Talking Movies with My Mom. And so we talk movies. And this episode that actually we published today, it was about our favorite directors, and mine, I chose the Coen brothers. And so we're talking about their first movie, Blood Simple, but we're also we're listing out some of their other movies. Well, Burn After Reading is a movie that we mentioned in the podcast. So when we go in to look at how the Descript, how the transcribe, like how the AI robot read that, it was Born After Eating. And I'm like, we have to edit that, because I don't want anybody to think that we actually said that, because I did not say Born After Eating. And then I didn't want them to think, wait a minute, they made a movie called Born After Eating. Although I'm now thinking that Born After Eating, I got to like write something about that. I mean, that's got to be like the title of a book or something I write, because that's just so crazy. But that's the kind of thing that even today, while AI, do not get me wrong, if I had to actually go in and transcribe the whole thing by myself, oh no, but it's great, but you still have to like pay attention to it at this point.
Yeah. Okay, I've got a couple of rapid fire questions because we've just got some really quick stuff. So what's the best way to create a podcast? Your software. What's your favorite? What would you recommend?
Okay, so we just create it, quite frankly, over Zoom. Okay. I know that sounds old school, but really old school now, but we just create it over Zoom. My son then edits it in Audition, and then he throws it into Descript, where we can do more of those like really detailed edits. And then that's it.
Okay. And what's the number one type of podcast? The number one type, if you had to.
Sure. No, I mean, actually, the number one is comedy.
Okay.
That's the number one
that
category.
Makes sense.
Yeah, it's comedy.
And do you have a favorite marketing podcast that you'd recommend to folks?
Oh, let's see. I'm kind of partial to Amy Porterfield. She's a great marketer, and she makes it super easy for me too. I mean, I'm like, oh, she has interesting guests, and I always learn something new from her podcast. So what is it? It's like Easy Marketing, or Marketing Made Easy, or something like that is, I think, is the name of the podcast. But yeah, that would be my number one recommendation.
Okay. Do you think that having a video component to your podcast is necessary, given that the high YouTube engagement you've mentioned, are straight to audio podcasts still popular?
Yeah, and that's a great question, because here's the thing. I think when you go on to, first off, yes, video is only going to expand, okay? But there's different ways that you could do a video podcast. Like, for instance, video, if you go onto YouTube and you find like podcasts, some of them will be on air, okay, but then some of them are going to be just the audio with maybe like some slides, okay? So it's video, but it's not video, you know what I mean? Because I think it's still in the early stage, because the beauty of audio is that you one, I mean, first off, nobody wants to see the like my son and I on a video. I mean, we come in, you don't want to see that. And you'd have to like actually have like lighting. It needs to like look fairly professional, where audio is a little bit easier to not have. You only have to sound professional. You don't have to look professional. And so that's one thing. But I mean, I think that audio is still going to be, because that's what podcasts are at its core, right? It's audio. And if you are trading visual for audio, I mean, your audio's got to be there first. So I think you need to think of podcasting, if you're doing a podcast, as audio forward, as audio first, and any sort of visuals that you have second.
Okay. So a couple of other questions, similar, but I'm just going to read these verbatim. So how can podcasting be harnessed as a science and communication tool? What do you have some recommendations there?
Oh man, that's good. As a education tool, I think, as a matter of fact, you know, it's interesting, and I probably need to do more going into the education podcasts, because education is actually another one of the most, it's actually a category of podcasting that is increasing in listeners, is education. And, but I'm not really sure how they're defining education. If it's just, you know, somebody doing like how-tos, or if it's actual academic institutions creating education. I know that obviously at UT, we have podcasts, and we have the Drag Productions that create some amazing podcasts. I know just from we've got a class that we teach in the advertising PR school that is also interested in actually having a podcast component to that. So I think that there's a lot of growth in education podcasting. And I think that it's, I think people are starting to see it as a way to learn new things. Obviously, I mean, I think that's one of the things that most podcasts help you with, is learning something that you didn't know. But I think that educational podcasts are being able to take it to a level that, again, it's on-demand learning, right? As opposed to, I have to be sitting in a classroom at a certain time, or I have to be hopped on a webinar at a certain time. It's on demand. And I think that is one of the components that's really helping move just podcasting along, period. But certainly in education, is that people can then sit down and listen to something that they want to learn about on their own timeline.
Absolutely. And that question was about education in general, but specifically about science and communication of science and research and things like that along those lines too.
You know,
Any further comments? Yeah.
I think that, I mean, I think with that, I don't really have any examples for that, but
Yeah,
I'm
that's fine.
guessing that my first thought would be like how you might use that is, I think that certainly I think you could use it as like, if you have a study, or if you have something that you want to, you know, have the masses understand, let's say, that I think you could do something in like a limited series. Because I think a lot of times people are put off by podcasts because they think they have to have 52 weeks every year, right? Like this has to be weekly, and oh my God, I mean, it's going to take up a massive amount of time. And if it were 52 weeks, yeah, it would take up a lot of time. You don't have that time. So so I would just, you know, in limited series, you could have like maybe 5-6 episodes that were all around a particular like study that had been done. And you could break it down each week. You could break it down into a different component, and maybe bring in guests that, if your strong suit isn't really, I mean, I hate to say it this way, but if your strong suit isn't really like dumbing it down for the masses, which totally understand, then maybe you would want to bring in like a guest who could kind of like maybe ask you some questions that would allow you to let people know about your study in a way that everybody could understand it. But I think that that would probably be one of the best ways to start using podcasting if you really want to get the science out there. And I think that would actually be pretty amazing. I mean, I would love to see podcasts. And if you do it, let me know, because I would love to hear it.
She did put a link in the question and answer, so we'll share that with you. That's
Cool.
good.
Okay, yay.
So here's another one. So for brands that aren't already loved by the masses, is it a better brand play to stick to the education on this industry? So in her case, solar is her industry for the niche audiences who are interested, or to branch out to more entertaining topics that are less strategically aligned, but it kind of reaches a larger audience. So
I mean,
maybe.
right. I mean, I think honestly, I think you could, I mean, I hate to be this where, oh, you could do either one, but in a way, you
Mhm.
could probably just do either one. Because here's the thing, like I was saying, podcasting is going to come to a point where you're going to want to niche down, right? And really have people that are into, okay, solar. And you'd probably be surprised at how many people that is. I mean, I think that there's a lot of people that are like maybe solar, interested in solar, but they don't really know enough about it. And that maybe you could have a podcast that kind of explain, maybe your target audience is people who are interested in solar, but they're not really sure how to get going with it, or what does that mean, or might that change their life. I think a lot of people think that if they go solar, it's like a complete life, and it might be, I have no idea, but maybe that's how you could do a podcast for that. Or, if you did want to do a podcast that was more for the people who actually are doing solar, then
Yeah.
you would want something that was a little bit more on brand for them, right? Like explaining, like, here are the ways that solar can be used in if you're selling solar, or maybe they're, like a third market or something like that. It really depends on who your audience is who is the target audience. And I think that right there is a question that a lot of people kind of start off by, let's just jump in and like start making a podcast. But if you don't know who your target audience is, then who's it for? And so if you know who your target audience is, you want to talk to people who are not, they're solar curious, right? Okay, then that is who every episode then is going to be based on. What do they want to know? What do they need to know? And it could be the like comedy, kind of like, being personable and everything. That could be no matter what you're talking about. You never want to be like super like stiff, and just like, you want to be kind of like, hey, I'm going to give you, you can trust me. I'm your best friend. You always want to approach a podcast as if you are their best friend, and you're going to tell them something no one else is going to tell them. And then from there, you'll just see what happens. But I don't think you go wrong with finding your target audience and then just really leaning into that.
Okay. A little bit of a different direction. So what is a trustworthy website showing the number of downloads for a podcast? So how do people measure?
Yeah. Okay. So, so are you, if you're talking about just a general download, I mean, quite frankly, I don't really know if there's like a trustworthy website that's not just like Google, But here's the thing: if it's your podcast, okay, if it's your podcast, you can go in to your podcast host, okay, whoever that is, and there's like a ton of them. There's like, oh my God, there's a ton of, but the podcast host will have a list of your downloads, okay, and it should be across all the platforms. So if you're on like Spotify and Apple Podcast and Amazon Music, and now you can like also do a feed through YouTube and all this stuff. So your podcast host is like keeping all of those downloads. They should be keeping it for you so that you have a good number. And also you go in and because you'll be have accounts on each one of those podcast platforms anyway too. You can also go into the podcast platforms and find out how many downloads that you personally have. But as far as just like, how are they, I just Google. That's really all I can find.
That is a valid answer. Don't worry about that. So one more question, and then we got a couple housekeeping things. So this question is, what attributes made the Trump on Joe Rogan experience impactful? What, it really did well. So what made it impactful?
Well, I mean, I think that it just, one, I think that, Joe Rogan knows who his audience is.
Yeah.
First and foremost, he knows who his audience is. And so does Trump, for that matter.
Mhm.
And for them, that created a synergy because they both had similar audiences. And I think that, Joe Rogan is just really good at just letting people talk. And I think that was basically what did it. I mean, I don't think that there was any sort of magic formula for this. I
Okay.
think it just was for people who listen to Joe Rogan. I think that this was just I don't think Trump said anything that he hadn't said before. And I think that he was just able to come on and be like, okay, I'm going on Joe Rogan. I think people were just Joe Rogan, fans were excited about that and seeing like their two favorites get together kind of thing. And I think it just worked from that aspect. I mean, I don't know if, and I think that was something that some candidates were better at doing than others, finding the right fit for them to go on these podcasts.
Okay. And then we've had a couple people ask if there is a good way that they can contact you. So I just wanted to ask you, what's the best way for people to connect with you?
Probably the best way is, let's see, because I've got like a couple of emails. I mean, you could certainly contact me through my UT email.
Okay, that's best.
Which is just, yeah. I mean, you have that email that you can like.
Yeah, of course.
Absolutely,
Okay.
you can contact me through that.
That's wonderful. And then for everyone, if you did not hear the earlier announcement, this lecture will be up on YouTube in a day or so. So you can catch the first part of it or anything that you missed at that point. So we're going to have to close down now. This was fascinating. I think we could let you talk with us for hours on end. So really appreciate your time and thank you again.
Thank y'all so much. I loved the questions. Thank you so much for asking all those questions. Those were amazing questions. And I just would be happy to continue the conversation.
Oh, all right. And thank you again to our sponsor, Extended Campus, and to everyone who attended the lecture today. Our lunchtime lecture series will return in January, and that spring full schedule will be released around January, maybe a little early, so check back at texasaccess.org/lunchtime lectures. And thanks again for attending, and we look forward to seeing you in the new year. Bye, guys.
Thanks, y'all. Thank you.